The Kingdom of England. Well, of course, there are different Anglo-Saxon kingdoms before that, and Rome before that, but we gotta start somewhere. Technically, the first English king is Alfred the Great, even though he was technically only king of Wessex. That's West Saxon with an E. He was pretty great because he modernized the things, actually translated stuff into languages people actually read instead of Latin, but important for this video, he dealt with the Vikings by just sharing England. And came his eldest son Edward the Elder, and then his son Ethelstan, who kicked the Vikings out and was the first actual king of the English. His two brothers and two nephews. Then Edward II the Martyr was assassinated, so the crown passed to his brother Ethelred the Unready, who was unready to find out that his name is a pun. Also, the Vikings are back. But Ethelred got the crown back for a few years. His first son, Edmund II, Ironside, kicked some butt for a while until he was assassinated on the toilet. So the guy from Denmark's son, Canute, put a ring on Ethelred's widow. He was considered the Great because he had Denmark, Norway, and England forming the North Sea Empire, which wasn't what it was actually called at the time. Canute had two half-English kids. Most people wanted Harthacnut to succeed him, so instead his older brother Harold. But it doesn't matter because neither of them had kids, so the throne passed back to Harthacnut's half-brother, Edmund the Confessor. Ed III did keep the peace and all, but he was also an asexual, bookish nerd, so he didn't have any kids. So the crown passed to his brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson. As approved by the Witan, a council of nobles, Harold Godwinson didn't have a whole lot of time to do something because 1066 was the most important date in English history. The King of Norway, who is also named Harold but with two A's, been around the world and said, might as well be Harold III of Norway and Harold III of England. And he was supported by Godwinson's brother Tostig. Meanwhile, in France, the Duke of Normandy, William the Bastard, decided he should also be King of England, because his aunt married Ethelred and Canute. Supported by the Pope because England wasn't Catholic enough for Europe, and an army of heavy cavalry. So now we have three people trying to be the King of England, all of which with great facial hair. Harald arrived first in York, so Harold had to go all the way up, leading to the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which Harold actually won decisively, and Harald Hardrada died during. But also William landed a few days later ahead of schedule. So now Harold screamed and had to run the entire length of England in a few days, and he surprisingly made it there in no time. The Norman and English clashed. There was a tapestry made of it, and William unceremoniously fell off his horse. And he got on another horse, which also tossed him off, and he was stepped on by a third horse and died. The army scattered or joined the English. William's two young sons inherited Normandy, but both of them died under mysterious circumstances, and Normandy was divided between all the major powers. And because of this heralding success, Harold Godwinson became known as Ironside. Godwinson's family stayed on the throne, and he was very upset about the Pope. But Harold decided to do something else with his time, like learning and copying the heavy cavalry tactics from the Normans, inventing the longbow, which led to the conquest of southern Wales and Dublin from Ireland. It pushed Scotland out of England and then even pushed them into the Highlands, overthrowing Donald III for Duncan II. Tried claiming Denmark, but only got to the mainland peninsula of Jutland, so in a way the Anglo-Saxons got to go back home. And he updated the old system of Anglo-Saxon slavery to the modern serfism, which was basically the same, especially in England. Harold died in 1090 from a chill and was succeeded by his eldest son, Godwin I, who served for 7 years and died during the First Crusade at the Siege of Antioch. He never had any kids that lived, so it passed over his dead brother Edmund to his living brother Magnus. So he had to kind of awkwardly abandon the First Crusade, but his younger brother Harold did become Count of Tripoli until he was assassinated. Magnus lost an eye in combat, which was seen as a problem because the king should be, full body and not of any blemishes and yada yada. So the Witan decided to elect a distant relative named Edgar instead. Magnus wasn't exactly happy to find Edgar II, so this started a civil war. Magnus won the war, and Edgar managed to escape to Poland, where he kind of just faded into obscurity. But supposedly, the Grand Dukes of Lithuania were descended from him, but no one really knows. Magnus married Matilda of Scotland, which gave them an alliance, and also some legitimacy because she was related to Edward Ironside. The crown passed to his son Walder, who married his cousin, and finished the conquest of Wales, so now the red and white dragon under one banner. Edmund III tried to get a divorce from the actual English Pope, but they said no, and they were barely able to have one kid. He also ended up losing Denmark, and Scotland pushed him back into England, but he did help support an Irish king to give them a better foothold into Ireland. Edward IV had a little bit of peace, and awkwardly his wife Constance ended up inheriting and becoming Queen of Sicily, so it was decided that the two kingdoms would be split by the two sons. At this time as well, because of increased trade with France, the English language started to shift a little. And Ælfwald and Magnus II, Oswald I, who died of dysentery, so it went to his brother Ælfwine. During this time, there were two popes, one in France and one in Italy. But Ælfwine was frustrated with both of them because he was not allowed to appoint his friend as the Archbishop of Canterbury and to keep appointing people he doesn't like, eventually leading to him being excommunicated. So he decided, screw it, I'm going to make my own damn religion. Much like England itself, it was kind of this mix of Celtic and Germanic culture and a little bit of Catholicism, being known as the Path of Wisdom. Adopting the ancient symbol of a pentagram as their new symbol, the faith kind of has this weird layout if you're more familiar with Catholicism. At the top, there is Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, who are responsible for the creation of everything, including humans, by having tons of celestial sex. Many people have become part of the divine tribe, or saints, by becoming so holy through a process of transformation known as theosis, through prayer and good deeds, such as Jesus Christ, as well as a bunch of Christian stuff. Women are allowed to be ordained and even become bishops. They don't care about the Pope in Rome. Bishops appoint their own bishops. There are many archbishops, but the Archbishop of Canterbury is the first among equals, known as the governor of the church, and the supreme governor of the church is the monarch, as well as some other stuff, eventually leading to the sack and redistribution of Catholic goods. The Pope was still wondering if the Pope should live in Rome or not, and eventually the French Pope won. The Pope launched a crusade against England, trying to install Ælfwine's nephew, Roger IV the Handsome, to bring England back into the Catholic world. This was known as the 100 Years' War. They made some good strides into East Anglia, but Ælfwine's son, Edward Longsword, was able to push them back into the sea. And because also they translated the Bible into English, more people were actually allowed to read it. So a lot of places started following the path of wisdom, starting to shatter the Catholic control on Europe. There was also a rebellion in Wales, and Edward also realized that polygamous thing was gonna cause a lot of problems down the line, so it was decided that the Widden would help select a new heir. 2 more Eds, and that problem came up. Because now there was a bunch of half-brothers and a bunch of people fighting for the throne, like Rupert I, Oswin I, his son, and Magnus, his brother. Magnus III came out on top of this civil war, but because of his barons, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta to make sure that the king was the law, but he was also not above the law. As well as expanding the power of the Witan, which grew to have its own 3 estates system, like in France, by having a House of Commons, a House of Lords, and a House of Spiritual, which eventually just merged with the House of Lords. Magnus's only son Sigismund was killed in the war, so it passed to his nephew Arthur II. And yes, that's Arthur II because they believed that the Arthurian legends were real at the time. The Crusaders tried attacking England again, and they all died in the terrible weather of England. Throne then passed to Magnus IV, and this leads to the famous story. When Magnus IV accidentally killed his granduncle Leo of Cornwall in a joust, Leo's son Wulf vowed vengeance against him and declared himself king, but nothing really happened for a good long while, until 1447, where James III of Scotland, the brother-in-law to Magnus, invited the family up north, where they were then ambushed, which started the War of the Long Winter. Because Wulf was allied with James, and he ended up killing both of Magnus's sons, Ethelred and Thomas. Magnus, his daughter Holly, and loyalists held up in a castle in York. And during this 2-year-long siege, the winter was particularly harsh. It supposedly lasted the entire 2 years they were there, and Magnus became known as the Bloody because he snuck out at night and killed Scottish men who all believed him to be a banshee. Eventually, Wulf decided to assault the castle, but Magnus stood his ground and defended everyone's escape, supposedly freezing to death, never bending to the assault. Holly, now the queen, rallied her troops and led to the Battle of Wakefield, where Wulf was killed, and James surrendered. Holly was known as the Winter Queen because women had a lot more rights in England than the mainland, but she was very disinterested in actually ruling. She never married or had kids, and many people believed that she was in love with Wolfe before the rebellion. So the throne decided to be passed to the closest male relative that was a descendant of John V of Brittany, due to his mother being Dorothy, the daughter of Magnus III. Then Holly rode off into obscurity with her best friend, Mary of Gotland. This was also done so England can avoid the crown passing to the Catholic Godwinson family that was still going strong in Sicily, under Roger X, the king in Africa, who was pretty powerful, who was married to the sister of the king of France, who was also his first cousin, and taking control of what is today Tunisia. So the second line of kings of England, Montfort, started with Francis I, who was known as the Well-Beloved. Him and his brothers agreed to convert, but Francis also died without any kids, so the throne passed to his brother Peter I, known as the Simple, not because he's dumb, but because he was kind of just a plain guy, then to his other brother Arthur III, the Just. But then this also brought a land border to England, so the 100 Years' War was now increasing. But luckily, England also was quick adopters of this newfangled rifle thing, so Conan I and Rupert II led a pretty successful defense of their new holdings. But Elfwine II was known as the absent-minded because he ended up losing his larger army with way better equipment to a peasant girl named Augusta of Orleans, and being pushed to just lesser Britain. His mind was more focused on the fact that around this time, an Italian dude made it to America and came back and told everyone, and everyone listened. So him and his son Arthur IV pushed for a mass amount of colonization. Rupert III was kicked out of their original homeland of Brittany, but they didn't really mind, and eventually, after another Ed, Elfwine III became incredibly wealthy off of the tobacco trade, which he was a very big fan of. He also married a member of House Tully of Ireland, so he had a bit of a significant soft spot for the Irish, but the Witan didn't. This led to a long rebellion in Ireland, which eventually led to a compromise by naming the rebel leaders as earls and making them convert. Elfwine was then succeeded by his eldest daughter, Oakley. She's known as the Summer Queen because she kind of disappeared in the colony of Florida. There's about 1 million conspiracy theories about it, but whatever. The throne passed to her sister Holly II, then to Harold III, who established the modern coat of arms with lions on it. And for a good long while, we get a pretty safe, consistent, and kind of funny back and forth between father and sons, both named Ethelred and Rupert. Of course, the famous Rupert VI.
He lost America and his mind. Never fear, the rules are here, so the crown continued to calmly descend the family tree.
The throne passed to his son, Ethelred VI, who tried conquering Norway, but failed. He never married, so the throne passed to his brother, Edward IX, who outlived both his sons, so the throne passed to his nephew, the son of Canute, at the age of 15 became King Alfred II, who ended up ruling all the way until 1902. He is in fact his namesake of the Alfredus era. And much like his namesake, Alfred the Great is seen as one of the biggest and most important figures in English history. You know, you don't live that long and don't oversee something important. He only married once to Alberta of Prussia, who was pretty quiet and bookish, but the two were seen as one of the most peak examples of love. Incredibly dedicated to each other, and they had an insane amount of kids who were married off to royal families across Europe, uniting Path of Wisdom, Catholic, Orthodox, and even Calvinist Europe. After Alfred, the Witan selected Alice I, who was pretty similar to her mother and very quiet, but her only kid married into the Russian royal family, so the Witan selected her brother, Alfred V. There's tons of rumors that he was secretly Joaquin the Ripper in London, but there's way more evidence that he wasn't even in the country at the time of the attacks. Arthur's son Alfred died in Africa, and Arthur himself died in a car crash, showing that Alfred and Alberta accidentally spread a severe case of hemophilia. So the crown passed to Rupert VII, who was a tennis player who was not at all prepared to oversee the Great War, the Great Depression afterwards, which eventually led to the collapse of the English Empire, which definitely caused him to have a stroke in the 1950s. So in 1950, his daughter, Holly III, was crowned, and she's the famous one that's been alive for the majority of most people alive today's lives. And just like Alfred II, she just made it right over the finishing line of the new millennia in 2002, succeeded by her only son Magnus V, who unlike his mother stayed out of the public eye for the most part, because behind the scenes he was a massive alcoholic. His struggles with alcoholism eventually caught up to him as he passed away very recently in 2024, being succeeded by his very eccentric son, Edward X. From there, the throne would pass to his eldest child, Sarah, who's known as Elfhelene, which means crown prince or princess, or if something goes wrong, to his two twin sons, Harold or Carol, or even up to Edward's half-brother, David, who is the first royal family member to openly come out as gay. But that was a brief look at the English royal family. But let me know who your favorite king of England was down below, as well as hitting the like button and subscribe button when you're down there.